Hi everyone. I wanted to make a video today to continue my series on boundaries. I've made some notes, so if I look over to the side, I'm just glancing down at my notes to make sure that I cover all the points that I wanted to talk about in this video. So my last video was about defining boundaries. What are they? What is their role in our lives? And I gave an example of a situation where you might need to set a boundary. So in this video today, I want to talk about how to find your boundaries, because I think many people don't set boundaries because they simply don't know how to find their boundaries. They don't know what their own boundaries are. So they drift through situations in a somewhat unconscious fashion, and they're just not even aware often of when their boundaries are actually being violated or transgressed by other people. So it is very important to know what your boundaries are, because it really defines you as a person. It really helps you to set limits in your life that really help you to conserve your energy, help you to attract positive people and situations into your life. This helps to keep negative energy to a minimum in your life. So it is very important to know what you stand for, and to know what you will and won't accept. And that's where boundaries come in. So in this video, I'm going to just talk a little bit about how you can find your boundaries and know what they are, so that it's just that much easier to identify when someone has stepped over a boundary, and you can set a boundary, or just kind of enforce your boundary, protect that boundary, which is something I'm going to talk about in a later video. But today we're just going to talk about finding your boundaries. So in my opinion, there are two types of boundaries. The first is what I call your moral boundaries, or your principle boundaries. So this has got to do with your moral code in life, your philosophy to life. This has got to do with your beliefs about right and wrong. So your moral boundaries are heavily influenced by factors like your religion, how you were raised, your culture, just your sense of, as I say, of right and wrong in the world, what you regard as socially acceptable, morally acceptable behavior. So things like the Ten Commandments, the Seven Deadly Sins, those sorts of things would come into play when we're talking about moral boundaries. So things like not engaging in illegal behavior, not acting in a criminal way, not lying, not cheating, not stealing from people. All those sorts of things feature into your moral boundaries. So your moral boundaries tell you, that these are the sorts of behaviors you don't want to be involved with. Other facets of your moral boundaries would be things like, I won't get in a car with someone who's been drinking. So that would be a moral boundary or a principle boundary. Or perhaps you have a moral boundary around infidelity. So if you know that, say, your friend is cheating on her husband, you might feel that that's a moral boundary, where you can't condone that behavior. So moral boundaries are, as I said, they've got to do with your perceptions of right and wrong. You might have a moral boundary regarding sex, for example. You might believe that you won't sleep with someone on the first date, or until you're in a committed relationship, or perhaps not before you're married. So hopefully this gives you a sense of what moral or principle boundaries are. They're not so much about you personally as they are about the moral code with which you approach and view the world. So there are standards of behavior that you live by, and that you expect of other people in order to consider that person a decent, upstanding person. And it is very important to have a moral compass and a moral code in life. I highly encourage you, if you're not certain of your moral code, I highly encourage you to investigate this. As I say, you can find clues about your moral code in your religious beliefs, in your culture. Your family and parents would have influenced your moral code, but you might also have been brought up in a certain religion and a certain culture, and you might have decided to go in a different direction after you grew up. Perhaps you don't actually agree with the religion, or or the culture, or the way that you were brought up, and you might have your own completely different set of morals. Aspects such as our political beliefs, your sexual orientation, whether you're right-leaning or left-leaning, these sorts of things will heavily influence your moral code and the kind of boundaries that you have. So another example is if you don't believe in abortion, and you find yourself having an unplanned pregnancy, you might have a boundary about not getting an abortion, and someone might try to pressure you into it, and you have a boundary around that. That would be an example of a moral or a principle boundary. And as I say, these are very, very fundamental boundaries, so I highly encourage you to get clear on what your moral and principle boundaries are, because these are the kinds of boundaries that help us to sleep at night. If we know that we have done everything in our power to be a very decent and upright person, according to our views of what a decent and moral and upright person is, this gives you tremendous peace. It allows you to have the satisfaction of knowing that you interact with other people and the world in a way that you consider to be morally right. So if honesty is a moral boundary for you, then you'll impose that standard of behavior on yourself. You won't lie to other people, and you won't accept people who lie to you. So it greatly improves your quality of life if you know what your moral and principle boundaries are. I think that's fairly straightforward. So I want to move on to the second type of boundaries, which are really my favorite to talk about. And I call them your personal or your intuitive boundaries. So these are boundaries that are very personal to you as an individual. And as the name suggests, or as my introduction of this type of boundary suggests, these are different from one person to another, and this is where the fun really comes in, or the self-exploration comes in, because these are not boundaries you would have inherited from your parents or your religion or your culture, your upbringing, or any other kind of external influences. These are boundaries that are very intuitive and personal to you. So things which would influence your personal or intuitive boundaries are your personality characteristics. If you're an introverted person, you might have a boundary around how much time you can spend in social settings and around other people. You might have a boundary about needing alone time to yourself each week or each day. Another example of a personal or intuitive boundary is it has really got to do with your energy levels. Some people have just very high energy levels, and they're able to, you know, give a great deal in terms of their energy and keep going for much longer than others. Other people have much lower energy levels and they need to conserve their energy levels, so they would have a personal boundary around, you know, how much they're able to give of their time and energy before needing to take a rest. But really, your personal and intuitive boundaries have got to do with your own personal needs as a person and your preferences. These kinds of boundaries have got to do with how you individualize your life and how you communicate that to the outside world. So personal and intuitive boundaries are something that you feel. Moral principle boundaries would be something, as I say, which would be this would be something that's more external. You can find morals kind of written down somewhere, you know, whether it's in the Bible or some other religious book or the law, but moral and principle boundaries tend to be placed externally, whereas personal or intuitive boundaries are inside your own heart. They're inside your own body, and your inner self communicates to you about your personal and intuitive boundaries. So if you're brand new to finding your own personal or intuitive boundaries, really the best place to start is to pay attention to your feelings. And if you're not really used to getting in touch with your feelings, then the best place to start really is to get in touch with your bodily sensations. How do certain situations feel to you? So if we go back to the example of an introverted or an extroverted person in a social setting, an introverted person, when they're reaching the point where they've had enough of the social situation, and when they start to need to set a boundary about, you know, leaving the situation and going home, they'll actually notice certain bodily sensations. For me, I'm an introvert, so for me, what I notice when I'm getting to that point is I start to feel tired. My thoughts start to become slow. When people ask me a question or when I try to engage in conversation, I just find it harder to respond or to form my thoughts and my words. I just become sluggish and tired. My head feels a little bit foggy and cloudy, and I just have a kind of a heavy sensation, particularly in my head, in the rest of my body as well. My sort of limbs start to feel a little bit heavy, and I just don't really move or talk as quickly. I might also notice myself getting irritable, sort of feeling a little bit frustrated with very small things. And you know, I sometimes get like a sort of a hot, scratchy feeling on my skin, like I'm just irritable. And that is always a good indication for me that I really just need to take a break. You might find yourself feeling hungry when your energy levels are starting to dip. Your breathing might become a little bit more shallow. Your heart rate might speed up a little bit. These are all cues that we need to take some kind of care of ourselves, and that often involves setting a boundary. So I would just encourage you, pay attention to the bodily sensations that you are feeling, and notice when your bodily sensations start to feel uncomfortable to you. This is really the clearest sign that we need to set some kind of a boundary. For me, I notice if someone makes a request of me, if my heart starts beating fast, and I feel my eyebrows kind of start to knit together, I can feel myself sort of frowning. I can almost feel my face kind of pinching up a little bit if someone makes a request, and I kind of tense up a little bit. My shoulders get a little bit tense. I kind of want to close off my body language a bit. And for me, as I say, my heart starts beating quite fast when, when someone makes a request to me that I'm not completely comfortable with. These are very, very important signs that this is a boundary for you. And it's important to know your own personal and intuitive boundaries, because it might not be an obvious moral boundary. Someone might make a request of you which is not obviously right or wrong. It's more got to do with a personal preference about whether you want to say yes or no. So if a friend asks you to pick them up from the airport, say, that's not a right or wrong situation. That's got to do with a personal or intuitive boundary. So pay attention to how you feel when the person makes that kind of request. If they make that request and you immediately feel very calm about it, you feel neutral, the idea doesn't fill you with any kind of dread, you just don't really notice any change in the way you're feeling, that is a good indication that the request that person is making is reasonable for you. And you can go ahead, if you feel, as I say, if you feel calm and neutral and comfortable, you can go ahead and agree to that request. That's a good, your body sensations are like a green or a green or a red light. So yes or a no. A green light means yes, and red light is no. So feelings of comfort, calm, neutrality, no sort of feelings of anxiety or dread, those are green light feelings. However, if they ask you for a favor, they ask you to pick them up from the airport, they ask something else of you, and you feel your chest tighten, you feel your breathing get shallow, you feel your heart beating faster, you feel this sense inside where no, 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 I don't want to do it. Maybe you're like me and you actually feel your whole face kind of closing up and scrunching up, even if it's just a little bit. Pay attention to these feelings, because they don't just come out of nowhere. These are signs that this is a situation where you need to set a boundary, and this is where you need to say no to some extent. So really, when it comes to your own personal and intuitive boundaries, this is not for anyone else to tell you where these boundaries should be. This is completely up to you to decide, and your own body and your own internal guidance and your feelings are the very best guide of where these boundaries should be. And I really encourage you to have fun with paying attention to how you feel in different situations. Really try and get in touch with the feelings that you experience when people say and do things, because this will help you to learn about your own boundaries and what feels good and what doesn't feel good, because boundaries are all about what feels good to you, what doesn't feel good to you. And it's really important that we familiarize ourselves with these boundaries, because if we don't, they have a way of intensifying, and they will keep coming up and presenting themselves in order to get our attention, because there's a higher part of us that that wants us to live in alignment with who we are, the person that we were born to be. And so if you are consistently ignoring the messages that you're getting from your own self, from your body, from your heart, from your spirit, about what feels good and what doesn't feel good, these situations will keep presenting themselves until you learn these things about yourself. And it's also just a really, really great way to feel better. You'd be amazed at how your moods and your attitudes and your overall levels of happiness will improve when you really learn what feels good and what doesn't, and you start saying yes to what feels good and no to what doesn't feel good. So just an example from my own life of how boundaries can intensify until you really pay attention to them and act on them. I was once in a temporary job at a law firm. I'm qualified in law, and I was working for 6 months for a law firm, and there was an elderly lady, or sort of an older woman there, who was the bookkeeper, and she was a real dragon lady. She had a very, very gruff and kind of brusque way about her. She had a very kind of tactless way of talking to people, and she saw herself as kind of like a matriarch at the company, and she would talk to the younger employees any way she felt like it, you know. And she had her favorites, and she had people she didn't like so much, and if you happened to be on the list of people she didn't like, you know, she would talk to you in a very horrible way. And I was brand new there, and I was still learning the way that things were done, and I certainly didn't have anyone explaining everything at every turn to me, so I would occasionally get things wrong, and she would take it upon herself to shout at me and berate me and tell me I didn't know what I was doing and hadn't anyone taught me, and I would say, well, no one has told me how this is done. But she really went way overboard and kind of went to town every time I made a very small mistake, where, I mean, she could have easily just shown me the correct way to do it in a very kind of constructive or kind way, but she chose not to do that. She chose to be really rather nasty about it. And I swallowed this behavior for a couple of weeks. I just tried to stay out of her way. I tried not to make mistakes, and I just tried to avoid her. And of course, the more you avoid a situation like this, the more you seem to kind of pull it towards you, because this is a situation where you need to take action on your own behalf. It felt absolutely dreadful having to come to work and interact with this woman every day. And I was trying to run from that feeling instead of face it. You know, I lived with this anxiety and this sense of dread for a few weeks, as I say, until I finally got up my courage one day, and she came to me about, again, some minor issue, which was having a go at me, and I let her finish, and I said to her, if you can't talk to me in a respectful way, then don't talk to me at all. She had interrupted a conversation I was having with someone else, and I just turned to her and I said, you know, you can either talk to me in a respectful way or not at all. And she was flabbergasted. She hadn't expected that from me, but that was me setting a boundary. This is how I want to be treated. You know, it was a a moment of drama where she, you know, couldn't believe that I'd stood up to her, and it was a kind of a brief flurry where she was in a bit of a huff and a bit of a tiz. But from that day forward, she was perfectly polite to me and helpful, and she was never nasty to me again. And I just immediately felt better, because I hadn't attacked her boundaries. I hadn't, you know, gone over to the other extreme, like I talked about in my other video, where I had reacted too harshly. And I also decided I wasn't going to just keep being silent about it in order to try and be nice and, you know, hope that the situation would go away, hope that she would eventually like me. No, it was time to set a boundary, and I did it in a very calm and clear and direct way. And things improved exponentially from there. So this is an example of how your boundaries are really a call for you to respect yourself and uplift the situations that you're in. You know, they're calling you to a higher place. They're calling you to more happiness and better things in your life. So it really, really is worth the effort to investigate where your boundaries are. What situations are you comfortable in? What situations are you not comfortable in? And as I say, a lot of this is individual. I mean, another person in that same situation with that woman at work might have just been able to let her comments just roll off them like water off a duck's back. There, you get people like that where it might not have been a boundary issue for them, but it was for me. I'm a sensitive person. I like to be spoken to in a kind way, in a respectful way, and so it was a boundary issue for me, and I had to honor that. And it's the same way for you. So pay attention to your feelings, and don't judge yourself for not liking certain situations. It's your right to say, I don't like this situation, I don't want to be in this situation. Just make sure that you do it in a way that is honoring to yourself and honoring to the other people in that situation. I'm going to talk a little bit more about how to set boundaries in an honorable way in another video. But hopefully the pointers and examples I've given in this video will help you to know where your boundaries are, and it's a lifelong process. You know, it's something you have to invest time and energy into for your entire life. We don't just all know just like that what our boundaries are. Sometimes we only discover them as we get into certain situations. That's why it's very, very important to pay attention to your feelings and to your body and what your body and your feelings are telling you, because they will give you the very best guide about whether a particular situation is acceptable to you or not. But I might do another video about this specific topic about your feelings and your bodily sensations, because it really is a it becomes very nuanced as well. You don't want to be setting boundaries purely out of a place of fear or anxiety. Boundaries are a very strong place to come from, and you want to be doing it from a place of clarity, so that you are behaving in an honorable way. But I'm going to leave it there for now. I think I've given you quite a lot to think about, and I'm really enjoying these videos about boundaries, and I'll have a new one for you soon.